There is a kind of cold that gets into the brass buttons of a tunic and stays there, so that a man can feel the shape of every one of them through the wool, small circles of ice pressed against his ribs. On the morning I want to tell you about, that cold had been sitting on the forecourt since before dawn, and I had been standing in it for 2 hours with my chin up and my eyes fixed on the far railing, when I heard the particular scuff of her shoes on the flagstones and knew, without turning my head so much as a hair, that Winifred Ames had come. I could not look at her. That is the first thing to understand, and the thing that a man outside the uniform can almost never be made to understand, because it sounds like cruelty, and it is in fact the opposite. When I stand my post at the King's Gate, I am not a man named Wystan Croft with a stiff knee and a mother in the low country and a fondness for strong tea. I am a fixed point. I am the same as the stone lion on the pillar and the gilded spike on the railing, and the crown worked into the iron above the arch. The whole meaning of me is that I do not move, do not speak, do not answer, do not so much as let my gaze slide sideways to acknowledge that the world is passing. A statue that flinches is worth nothing. That is the bargain we make when we put on the bearskin. We trade our ordinary faces for a promise, and the promise is stillness. So I did not look at her, but I heard her. "Good morning to you," she said, the way she always said it, with a small lift on the last word that made it almost a question, as though she were not entirely sure the morning was good but was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. Then, because she had never once in 3 years of mornings failed to do it, she raised her right hand to the height of her shoulder and gave it a little turn in the air, not a big wave, not a wave meant for a crowd or a passing carriage, but a small private twist of the fingers, the sort of wave you give to someone across a room who you know is looking even though he is pretending not to. I was pretending not to. I was very good at pretending not to. 11 years I had stood one post or another for the House of Harrogate, and I had learned to keep a face that could have been carved. A tourist could shout in it. A boy on a dare could make faces 2 inches from my nose. I had once had a full mug of hot cider thrown across my boots by a man who wanted to see whether I would swear, and I had not so much as blinked, and the officers had spoken of it approvingly for a week. I was, in the plain accounting of the regiment, an excellent statue. And yet a small old woman with a wave undid me every single morning, and no one ever knew. Let me set the scene properly, because you should be able to see it. The King's Gate at the Palace of Harrogate faces east onto a broad forecourt of pale flagstones, worn smooth in a river shape down the middle where 100 years of feet have crossed. Beyond the forecourt is the outer railing, gilded at the tips, and beyond that the public road, and beyond that the city waking up carts, the first trams, the smell of bread from the bakehouses on Cordell Street, gulls arguing over the gutters. I stood inside the outer railing, in my sentry box or on my slow measured beat between the 2 pillars, and the public passed on the far side of the iron, close enough to speak to, far enough that they were another country. Winifred came from the south, along the railing, every morning at 11 minutes past 7. I know it was 11 minutes past because I could hear the great bell of the Cordell clock strike the quarter a few minutes after she had gone, and in 3 years she was never late enough to catch it, and never early enough to beat it by more than a breath. She walked with a stick in her left hand, a plain blackthorn stick with a worn brass ferrule, and she wore a coat the color of a wren's back, a soft brown that had once perhaps been richer and had faded into something gentler. Her hair was white and pinned, and she had a face that had done a great deal of smiling in its time. You could read the whole history of it in the lines, which all ran upward. She would come along the outside of the railing, and when she drew level with my post she would slow, and she would say her good morning, and she would give her small wave, and then, this was the part that took me the longest to bear, she would wait. Just for a moment. Just long enough to give me the chance I was never going to take. And then, when the statue did not break, she would nod as though I had answered after all, and she would walk on toward Cordell Street, and I would hear her stick and her shoes grow faint, and the morning would go gray again around the small, warm place she left. That was all. That was the whole of it for a very long time. A wave, a wait, a nod, and gone. If you had asked me in my first month at that post to tell you the great events of a guardsman's life, I would have told you about the state funeral I stood for, and the night the North Wing caught fire, and the visiting fleet lord who tried to make me present arms to his little dog. I would not have thought to mention the old woman with the wren-brown coat. It took me the better part of a year to understand that she was the great event, and that everything else was only weather. I should tell you how it began, as near as I can place it, though the truth is that these things do not begin so much as they are noticed to have already begun. It was autumn when I first took the Kingsgate post, and the tourists were thinning as the cold came on, and one gray morning I became aware that a woman had said good morning to me. This in itself was nothing. The public said all manner of things to us. They asked if we were real. They asked what would happen if they tickled us. They told us their children thought we were very brave, and told us less kindly that we looked like toys. I had a wall inside my head for all of it, and the wall was good, and their words hit the wall and slid down it and were gone. But something about the way she said it made me aware the next morning that she had not come. I noticed the absence before I had properly noticed the presence, which is a strange way to meet a person, backward, through the hole they leave. And the morning after that she came again and said her good morning, and this time I heard it as hers, a particular voice, a particular unhurried warmth, and I understood that she was a fixture as much as I was, that she had a root and a schedule and a self, and that she had folded me into her morning the way you fold a familiar tree or a familiar shop front into your walk to work. Then came the wave. I do not remember the first one, which grieves me a little because I would like to. I only remember the day I realized it had become a certainty, that if I stood the Kingsgate on a weekday morning, then at 11 minutes past 7, a small hand would rise at the height of a shoulder and turn in the air, and a voice would wish me a good morning, and I would give nothing back, and she would go on anyway. It had the shape of a devotion. That is the only honest word for it. She was devoted to a man who could not, would not, must not answer her, and she did not seem to want answering. She wanted only to do the small kind thing and then walk on. I want to be careful here because it would be easy to make this into more than it was, and it would be a lie. She did not love me. She did not know me. She did not know my name, or my face beyond the strip of it the bearskin allowed, or anything about me at all except that I was there, and that I was a guardsman, and that I stood very still. What she was doing, I came to believe, had almost nothing to do with the particular man inside the tunic. And that understanding, when it finally arrived, was the thing that opened the whole story up like a door, and I will come to it. But at the beginning I did not have it. At the beginning I only had the fact of her, the reliable warm fact, arriving at 11 minutes past 7 and leaving a small brightness behind. The rule against acknowledging the public is not a cruelty invented to make us miserable. It has reasons, and good ones. A guardsman who nods to one person must decide, 1,000 times a day, whom to nod to and whom to ignore, and the moment he is deciding he is no longer a symbol but a man with opinions, and the symbol is the whole point. The stillness is not for us. It is for the thing we stand for, the idea that the crown keeps its watch the same for everyone, the drunk and the dignitary, the mocker and the mourner, without fear or favor, hour upon hour, in all weathers forever. If I had waved back at Winifred Ames, I would have felt in the moment like a kinder man, and I would have chipped a small piece off the thing I was there to be. So I did not, and every morning it cost me a little more. That is the part I did not expect, when I was young in the uniform and proud of my carved face. I expected the provocations to be the hard part, the shouting, the mockery, the dog. Those were easy. Contempt bounces off a wall. What I did not expect was that kindness would be the thing I could not stand against. A man can hold his post through insult all day long. It is a gentle old voice wishing him well, morning after morning after morning, and expecting nothing, that finds the seam in the armor and works quietly at it. The other guardsmen knew, of course. You cannot keep a secret at a post you share in rotation. Corporal Denby, who took the gate on the days I did not, mentioned her to me once in the guardroom, over the awful tea, in the offhand way men use for things that matter. "Your old lady still coming by," he said. "The wave." "She's not mine," I said. "She waved at me too," Denby said. "First few times. Then she worked out my days from yours, I think. Now she does me a good morning, but she saves the wave for you." He said it without any weight, buttering a heel of bread, but I felt it land somewhere under the buttons. "Reckon you're the favorite." "We're none of us anybody's favorite," I said. "We're the gate." "Tell her that," Denby said, and grinned, and that was the end of it. But I carried it out to my next posting, the small, ridiculous fact that she saved the wave for me, and I stood a little straighter under it and was ashamed of standing straighter, because it was exactly the sort of small vanity the wall inside my head was supposed to keep out. Winter came on hard that first year. There was a stretch in the deep of it when the flagstones were sheeted with ice each dawn and the men grumbled and doubled their socks, and I stood the gate through the worst of it, and Winifred Ames came through the worst of it too. She came in a heavier coat, dark gray over the wren brown, and a scarf and gloves, and she walked slower and set her stick down more carefully on the treacherous stones, but she came, and she wished me good morning, and she waved. On the very hardest morning, when the wind came off the river like a blade and even the tourists had given up, she stopped a moment longer than usual at the railing, and she said, "You must be perished standing there. I don't know how you do it. God keep you warm somehow." I said nothing. I looked at the far railing. But I will tell you that something behind my breastbone turned over at that, at the plain, unguarded goodness of a woman old enough to be someone's grandmother standing in a killing wind to worry about whether a stranger was cold. And I think that was the morning, that exact morning, with the wind and the ice and the blessing, when she stopped being a pleasant feature of my post and became a person I was afraid of losing. Because that is what it is, you understand, to let anyone in past the wall. It is the same door for the warmth and for the fear. The moment I was glad she came, I was frightened of the morning she would not. And there were such mornings. Not many that first winter, but a few. A morning she did not come, and I stood there with my eyes on the railing and some foolish clenched thing in my chest that would not unclench until I had told myself, sensibly, that an old woman may have 100 reasons to keep to her fire on a bitter day, and none of them my business, and none of them mine to know or ask about or act upon. I was the gate. The gate does not go looking. The gate does not send word. The gate stands and waits and is given no promises. If she came, she came. If she did not, I would never learn why, because I had no right to learn why, because I was a fixed point, and fixed points are not owed explanations by the moving world. I tell you this not because anything dramatic happened in that first winter, nothing did, but so that you understand the shape of the thing before the shape of the thing changed. 3 years, the palace would say afterward when they told it. 3 years of a wave. They made it sound like a single smooth line, a woman and a guardsman and a small unbroken kindness, and I suppose from the outside that is what it was. From the inside it was 3 years of 1,000 separate mornings, each one its own small held breath. Will she come? Has she come? There she is. There is her hand, there is her good morning, and now she is walking on, and the warmth is walking on with her, and I have another day to stand. I did not know her name that first year. I want to be exact about that. I called her in the privacy of my own head the Wren for the coat, and I knew nothing else. The name Winifred Ames I learned later, and how I learned it is part of what I have to tell you, and it changed everything the way a name always does. A person without a name is a feature of your morning. A person with a name is a person, with a house and a history and a grief, and once I had her name I could not put it back, and I did not want to. But I am getting ahead. Let me go back to the forecourt, and the cold, and the small turning hand, and the long slow work of 3 years, and tell it the way it happened. I learned her name in the second spring, and I learned it by accident, which is the only way I could have learned it, since I was forbidden to ask. There was a morning in that spring when a delivery van misjudged the turn from Cordell Street and clipped a bollard, and there was a small commotion at the railing, the driver out and swearing at the dented panel, a constable ambling over, a knot of onlookers gathering the way onlookers do around any little disaster. Winifred was caught in it. She had drawn level with my post at her usual hour and could not easily pass, because the crowd had bunched against the railing, and she stood there patiently with her stick, waiting for it to clear, closer to me than she had ever been. And a young woman beside her, a nurse, I think, by the pale blue under her open coat, said kindly, "Are you all right there? You're not in a hurry, I hope." "Oh, I've all the time in the world, dear," Winifred said, "but I mustn't be too long. I like to say my good morning before the quarter strikes." And then, because the nurse looked puzzled, she added, with a small nod toward me that I felt more than saw, to the guardsmen. "I say good morning to the guardsmen, every day, have done for, a good while now." "Does he say it back?" the nurse asked, teasing gently. "He does not," Winifred said, and there was no complaint at all in it, only a kind of fondness. "He's not allowed. Poor lamb. My Harlan was the same when he stood his post, couldn't so much as twitch, not if you set his boots on fire. I used to walk past his gate of a morning just to see him being so grand and so miserable." She laughed, softly, at some picture 40 years old. "He'd have his eyes fixed on the middle distance like the whole kingdom depended on it, and I'd blow him a kiss, and he wouldn't move a muscle, but I could see the corner of his mouth wanting to. Just wanting to. I lived on that corner of his mouth for 31 years. I stood there with my eyes on the far railing and my heart going like a drum, and I did not move a muscle, and I understood. All at once, the way the sun comes out from behind a cloud and the whole field is suddenly gold, what I had been part of for a year and a half without knowing it. She had not been waving at me. She had been waving at a gate, and at every man who ever stood one, and behind all of them at one particular man who had stood one 40 years ago and could not wave back either. Her Harlan. Whoever he had been, he had worn a uniform like mine and kept a face like mine and stood a post like mine, and she had walked past his gate in the mornings of her young life and loved him for his grand and miserable stillness. And when he was gone, I did not yet know how, only that was had crept into her voice where is should have been. She had gone on walking past a gate in the mornings, and wishing a guardsman well, and waving her small private wave. Because it was the last thread of a thing she was not willing to let go of, and any gate would do, and any guardsman, and God help me, I was the one she had found. The constable cleared the crowd. The van was towed. Winifred, when the way opened, drew level with my post proper and said her good morning and raised her hand, and turned it in the air. And for the first time I understood that the wave was not for Wystan Croft. It never had been. And instead of the small vain warmth I had let myself feel it being someone's favorite, I felt something enormous and quiet open under me, like the floor of the sea dropping away, because I understood that I was standing in for a dead man, and holding a widow's love that had nowhere else to land, and that the kindest and cruelest thing I could do was exactly what I was already doing, to stand very still and let her wave, and never let her know I knew. I did not know his name that morning. Harlan I had, and Ames I did not yet have. The nurse had not asked her surname, and she had not given it, but I had enough. I went back to the guardroom that afternoon, and I did a thing I am not proud of and would do again in a heartbeat. I went to Sergeant Halloway, who had 30 years in the regiment and a memory like a parish register, and I asked him, as idle as I could make it, whether he had ever known a guardsman named Harlan. Halloway looked at me over his tea for a long moment. "Harlan," he said, "now there's a name I've not heard spoke in a while. Harlan Ames, Corporal, 1st Company, before your time and near before mine. Why?" "Heard it somewhere," I said. "Wondered." "Good man by all I ever heard," Halloway said, and something went soft and careful in his face, the way a man's face goes when he is about to say a heavy thing lightly out of respect. Died on the post. Not this gate, the river gate, the old water stair, back when we still kept a man on it through the flood season. There was a boy went into the river off the stair one spring. A little lad slipped through the rail chasing a paper boat, and Ames went in after him. Got the boy to the steps. Didn't come out himself. Current took him under the arch. He drank his tea. They gave him the cross of the realm for it, posthumous. His widow took it off the king's own hands, they say, and never made a sound the whole while, just stood there straight as a rifle like she'd learned how from him. That be, what, 30-odd years gone now? More. Why do you want Harlan Ames Croft? I could not answer him for a moment. I was seeing the whole of it laid out. The young guardsman who could not wave back. The young wife who blew him kisses to make the corner of his mouth want to move. The boy in the river. The water taking a man who had chosen in half a second to spend his life on a stranger's child. And the woman left, straight as a rifle, standing very still while a king pinned a bit of bronze to the empty place where a man had been. And then 30 years, and then a wren-brown coat, and then a small hand turning in the air at 11 minutes past 7, morning after morning after morning, at any gate, at any guardsman, at me. No reason, I told Halloway, just the name. He let me have the lie, which was kind of him, but as I left the guardroom he said, quiet to my back, if she comes by your post, that widow, you treat her gentle, whatever she wants of you. You hear me, Croft, that family paid the full price. She's owed all the gentle we've got. And I said, yes, Sergeant, and I meant it more than I had ever meant anything, and I went out to stand the evening watch with Harlan Ames's whole life sitting on my chest alongside the cold brass buttons. After that, everything about the mornings was different, though nothing about them changed. That is the strange part. I still could not look at her. I still could not answer. I still could not do the smallest thing to let her know that I knew who she was and who she had loved and what she was doing when she raised her hand. And now I could not do any of it while carrying the full, unbearable weight of the knowledge, which is a much harder stillness to keep than the empty kind. Because now, when she wished me a good morning, I heard under it 30 years of a widow's mornings. Now, when she waited that extra half-second at the railing, the small pause that gave me the chance I would never take, I understood that she was not waiting for me to break. She had made her peace with a man who could not break decades ago. The pause was not hope. It was ritual. It was the shape of the thing, the same as the wave and the good morning. And now, when she nodded as though I had answered and walked on toward Cordell Street, I understood that in her mind I had answered, that whatever passed between her and the still figure at the gate did not require my participation at all, because it was really passing between her and a memory, and I was only the place she came to have it. I could have found that diminishing. Some men would have. To be nothing to a person but a stand-in, a convenient gate, a substitute for the dead. There is a version of a man who would have felt cheated by that, who would have wanted to be waved at for himself. I want to tell you honestly that I felt the opposite. I felt honored past anything I had a word for. To be trusted, without knowing it, to hold the overflow of a great love, to be the gate at which a good woman came to keep faith with a hero, that seemed to me, and seems to me still, a far higher duty than any I had sworn to when I took the oath. The regiment had given me a post at a gate. Winifred Ames, without ever meaning to, had given me a post at the door of her heart, and asked me only to keep standing there. And I resolved that I would keep standing there as long as she came, and stand there well. So I learned her days as she had learned mine. I learned to know her step from 100 other steps on the flagstones, the particular double beat of shoe and stick, shoe and stick. I learned the small variations that told me how she did. The mornings her stick came down lightly and her good morning had a lift in it, and the mornings it came down hard and her voice was thin and tired, when the damp was in her joints or the night had been long. I could not ask her how she did, but I could know, the way you know the health of a tree you pass every day, and I did know, and it mattered to me more than the health of half the men I called friends. And I began, in my own silent way, to wave back. Not with my hand, I never once moved my hand, not in 3 years, not until the very end, and when at last I did move it, it was by a king's leave and in front of 1,000 people, and I will tell you about that when I get there. But a man who may not move learns other ways. I found that I could put something into my stillness. I could stand when she came, a fraction straighter than I stood for anyone else, not visibly, not a thing a passing eye would catch, but a gathering up of myself, a coming to attention on the inside, a silent presenting of arms to a woman who would never know she had received one. It was the only salute I could give her. I gave it every morning. And I told myself she could not feel it, and I was probably right. And I gave it anyway, because it was true and it was mine, and it was the whole of what I had. That was the second spring. That was the beginning of the middle of the story, though I did not know then that there was a middle coming, or an end, or that the palace behind me, the great house I stood in front of and had served for 11 years and thought of, if I thought of it at all, as a machine of stone and protocol with no eyes for a woman at a railing, was about to prove that it had eyes after all, and a heart, and a long memory for the names of the people who love it without being asked. Somewhere in that second year, the biscuits began. It happened small, the way everything with Winifred happened small. On a raw morning she stopped at the railing and I heard, over the ordinary sounds of her arrival, a new sound, a soft click of metal on stone. She had reached through the bars of the outer railing, as far as her arm would go, and set something down on the low granite ledge that runs along the base of the pillar, just within the iron, where a man on the beat passes close enough to touch it. Then she stood back and said her good morning and did her wave and went on. When my beat brought me level with the pillar, I let my eyes drop once, for less than a heartbeat, the way you can steal a glance without turning your head. It was a biscuit. A single plain biscuit, the kind an old woman bakes on a Sunday, wrapped in a twist of waxed paper against the damp, set square in the middle of the ledge like an offering on an altar. I could not take it. Not while on post, not with the whole public street watching. A guardsman does not stop his beat to eat a biscuit off a ledge. The thing is absurd on its face, and it would have broken every line of what I was there to be. So I left it. I stood the rest of my watch with it sitting there in the corner of my eye, and when I came off at the changing of the guard, I told the incoming man, Corporal Denby, about it in the low mutter we use for passing along the small business of a post. "There's a biscuit on the ledge by the north pillar," I said. "The old lady left it. Don't let the pigeons have it before she's out of sight tomorrow, if you can help it." Denby looked at me sideways. "You've gone soft, Croft." "Maybe," I said, "leave the biscuit." We left the biscuit. It was gone by evening, a bird or a sweeper or one of the ravens that worked the forecourt. I never knew. But the next hard morning there was another, and the morning after that, and it became a thing, a small silent economy running alongside the wave. She left a biscuit on the cold mornings, the mornings she thought I must be perished. She never left one in fair weather. It was, I understood, her way of putting something warm out where a man who was not allowed to be warmed could at least know that warmth had been intended. And the men of the guard, all of us who stood that gate in rotation, entered without a word spoken into a quiet conspiracy to honor it. We did not eat the biscuits on post. But we saw to it, each of us, that the ledge was clean and clear before she came, so that her offering had a place to sit. And more than one guardsman, coming off watch on a bitter noon, slipped the little wax twist into his greatcoat pocket and ate it in the guardroom, and found, I think, that it tasted of more than flour. I have thought a great deal since about why that mattered so much to hard practical men. I believe it is this. A guardsman spends his working life being looked at and not seen. 10,000 faces pass him in a season, and to nearly every one of them he is a costume, a photograph, a curiosity, a thing that is fun to try to make laugh. He is not a person to them. He is a feature of the city like a fountain. And a man can bear that it is the job, and there is even a strange pride in it, but it leaves a hunger in him that he mostly does not admit to, a hunger to be just once seen. Winifred Ames saw us. She did not see me in particular, as I have told you. She saw through me to a memory. But she saw the man in the uniform, the cold and the hours and the aching feet and the human warmth locked up behind the stillness, and she put out a biscuit for it. And that a stranger should see that much, and care that much, over a strip of granite in a killing wind, mended something in each of us that we had not known was broken. So the second year was a good year, as I count years. She came and waved and left her biscuits, and I stood straighter for her, and the machine of the palace turned behind us both, indifferent, or so I thought. Then came the cough. It was late in that second autumn, going toward the third winter, when I first heard it, a small dry cough under her good morning, quickly smothered, the sort of thing a proud woman turns her head to hide. I heard it and my stomach dropped, and I could do nothing, and I did nothing, and she waved and went on. The next morning it was there again, deeper. Within a week she was coming slower, and setting her stick down harder, and her good morning had gone thin as paper, and the cough had settled into her chest like a lodger who means to stay. I stood the gate and listened to a woman I was forbidden to speak to getting sicker by the day, 5 feet away through the iron, and I have stood some hard posts in my life, but I do not think I have stood a harder one than that. And then she did not come. I want to make you feel the particular terror of that, because it is a terror unique to men in my position, and no one who has not stood a post like mine will quite credit it. When someone you love stops coming to a place, you go and find out why. You knock on the door. You send a note. You ask a neighbor. That is what it is to be a person in the world, tangled up with other persons, owed and owing. But I was not a person in the world. I was the gate. I did not know where she lived. I did not know her surname. I had Ames from Holloway now, in the privacy of my knowing, but I could not have found one Ames among 10,000 in the city, and I had no right to go looking, and no leave to leave my post, and no standing to ask a single soul to make an inquiry on behalf of an old woman who was nothing to me, officially, but a member of the passing public who happened to walk by. I could not so much as say her name aloud to the men on watch as a person I feared for. I could only say, as I did say, as casually as my voice would let me, "The old lady's not been by, the wave, anyone seen her?" And they had not. Denby had not. Holloway, when I asked him, and I hated myself for the studied idleness I put into the asking, had not. She had simply stopped, the way a clock stops, and left a silence at 11 minutes past 7 where a warmth used to be. And there was not one thing in the world that I, Corporal Wystan Croft of the King's Guard, was permitted to do about it. I stood the gate every morning of that stretch with my eyes on the far railing and my ears straining south for a step that did not come. 1 day, 3 days, a week. The biscuits stopped, of course, the ledge stayed bare, and I cleaned it anyway out of some superstition, as though a clean ledge might call her back. 10 days. The cold came down in earnest. The tourists thinned. Every morning at the quarter I told myself the sensible things, that an old woman with a bad chest is quite right to keep to her fire, that 100 harmless reasons could keep her home, that it was arrogance and sentiment to imagine the worst. And every morning the sensible things were a little less use than the morning before, because 10 days is a long silence from a woman who had not missed a working morning in the better part of 2 years, except for the very deepest ice. It was in the middle of that silence that the machine of the palace first turned its face toward the matter of Winifred Ames, and I must tell you it did not, at first, turn a kind face. The queen consort in those years was a woman named Morwenna, and I will say of her only what my story requires and no more, because a guardsman is not paid to have opinions about the family he serves, and because the end of this tale turned out kinder than its middle deserved. But it is a fact that the consort kept a sharp and particular watch on the appearance of things, on the dignity of the forecourt and the grandeur of the gate, on how the palace looked to the world, and it is a fact that somewhere in that cold stretch it came to her notice that a member of the public had been in the habit of leaving items of food upon the ledge of the north pillar, and that the ledge had on occasion drawn pigeons and, once, a rat. I heard of it the way a private soldier always hears of the will of the great, sideways, downhill, third hand, arriving as an order stripped of its reasons. The order came down through an equerry to Sergeant Halloway and from Halloway to us, and it was this. The ledges of the King's Gate were to be kept clear at all times. No member of the public was to be permitted to deposit articles upon palace stonework, and any person making a habit of loitering at the railing was to be moved along, courteously but firmly, as a matter of good order and the dignity of the house. Halloway delivered it to the guardroom in a flat voice with his eyes on the middle distance, and every man there knew exactly whom it meant, and not one of us said her name. Denby's jaw worked. Young Pierce, the newest of us, opened his mouth and Halloway killed it with a look. An order is an order. That is the spine of everything we are. A guard who obeys only the orders he likes is not a guard, he is a hazard. We took it in silence. But I saw Halloway, when he had finished, stand a moment looking at the bare wall, and I saw his hand close slowly into a fist at his side, and then, with effort, open again. And I understood that 30 years of the regiment were fighting inside him with one plain order, and that the order was winning because it had to, and that it was costing him. "So that's how it is," Denby said low when Halloway had gone. "That's how it is," I said. "And if she comes back, sick as she's been, we're to move the widow of a Cross of the Realm man along off the King's own railing like she's a beggar with a barrow. We're to keep the ledge clear," I said, "and move loiterers along. That's the order. It doesn't say her name, it doesn't know her name." I heard my own voice go hard and careful, the voice a man uses to hold a thing together that wants to fly apart. "So we keep the ledge clear, and we do not, any of us, so long as I have breath, move that woman along like a beggar. There is room between those two things for a decent man to stand. We'll stand in it." It was, I see now, the first small step I ever took off the line of pure obedience and toward the thing that came after. Not a mutiny, nothing so grand, only a private resolve to obey the letter of an order while refusing its cruelty, to keep the ledge clear and keep the woman welcome, to trust that the order had been given by someone who did not know, and that not knowing was the whole of the wrong, and that a wrong made of not knowing can be answered by making someone know. But I did not have that thought clearly yet. I only had the resolve and the cold and the empty railing and the silence where her step should be. She came back on the 11th day. I heard her before I let myself believe it, the double beat, shoe and stick, slower than it had ever been, coming up from the south through the thin morning traffic. My whole body wanted to turn, and I did not turn. She came level with the post, and she was smaller than she had been, and grayer, and the cough was still in her. I could hear it caught in the corners of her breath. But she was upright, and she was there. And when she said "good morning" to you, the good morning had climbed most of the way back to its old lift, as though she had spent the 11 days practicing it. "There you are," she said, softer, just to me or to the gate or to Harlan, I have never been sure. "There you are. I was poorly, you know. I didn't like leaving you standing there with no one to say it to. Silly of me, as if you'd notice." She gave a small breath of a laugh that turned into the cough, and she pressed her glove to her mouth until it passed. "But here we are again. Here we both are." And she raised her hand, at the height of her shoulder, and turned it in the air. "I have stood the state funeral of a king. I have stood the return of the fleet in mourning, and the silence of 10,000 people, and the great bell tolling until the stones themselves seemed to grieve. I tell you that no ceremony I have ever kept moved me the way that small turning hand moved me on that 11th morning, when a sick old woman came back from wherever she had been to keep faith with a dead man at a cold gate, and found the gate still standing, and waved. I gathered myself up inside the uniform straighter than I have ever stood for any living soul, and I gave her the only salute I had, the invisible one, the presenting of the whole of me, and she could not see it, and I gave it anyway. And if there is a record kept somewhere of the true postures of men's hearts, then let it show that on that morning Corporal Wystan Croft stood at attention with his whole life for Winifred Ames, and meant it. She did not leave a biscuit. She had not had the strength, I suppose, to bake. The ledge stayed bare, and for once I was glad of the order because it meant there was nothing there for anyone to move along, nothing to give offense, nothing to bring the machine's cold face around again. She said her good morning and did her wave and walked on toward Cordell Street, slower than ever, and I stood and listened to her go and thought, we have got through the winter. We have got her back. Now I have only to keep the space I promised to keep, the ledge clear, the woman welcome, and we will go on as we were, the wave and the good morning and the invisible salute, world without end. That was the false dawn. I should have known better. In my experience, the machine does not turn its face away once it has turned it toward you. It only waits. It waited 4 days. On the 5th, a man in a good coat was standing at the railing when Winifred came. He was one of the household's junior officials, an under-equerry, I think, though I did not know his face well, a young man with a clipboard-carrying manner, and the particular smoothness of someone who has been told to handle a small unpleasantness and means to handle it correctly. He had been posted, plainly, to see the order carried out. Someone above him had grown impatient that the loitering had not yet been dealt with, and had sent a man of the house to deal with it, so that it should not be left to mere guardsmen who might be soft. I saw him take his position by the north pillar a few minutes before the quarter, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, exactly what was about to happen, and I knew that I could not stop it. I was on post. I was at attention. An order stood between me and every word I wanted to say. I could not step out of my place to warn her off, to spare her, to catch the young man by the good lapel of his good coat and tell him whose widow he was about to move along. I could only stand and be the gate and watch. She came up from the south, shoe and stick, and said her good morning to you, and had got as far as lifting her hand when the young man stepped smoothly into her path along the railing and said, in a voice pitched to be kind and pitched, therefore, to be unbearable, "Good morning, madam. I'm sorry to trouble you. I wonder if I might have a word." Winifred stopped, her hand came down. "Of course, dear," she said. "Is something the matter?" "Not at all, madam. Nothing's the matter," the young man said, and then he told her, in the gentle, bloodless language of good order, that the palace would be grateful if members of the public did not congregate at the railing, and that leaving articles upon the stonework could not be permitted, and that he must ask her with every courtesy not to make a habit of stopping at the gate. He said it well. He said it as kindly as such a thing can be said. And I watched it land on her, watched her understand by degrees what she was being told, that she was a nuisance, that her mornings were a nuisance, that the small faithful thing she had done for 3 years and 30 years before that was, to the great house she had loved and lost a husband to, an untidiness to be swept away. "Oh," she said, "just that. Oh, I see. I never meant to be a bother. I only stop a moment. I don't leave anything, not lately, And then she stopped trying to explain, because you cannot explain a thing like that to a clipboard, and I saw her draw herself up, straight as a rifle, the way Halloway had said she stood when the king pinned the cross to the empty air, and she said, with a dignity that broke my heart clean across, "I'm very sorry to have caused any trouble. I won't stop again. Please tell them I'm sorry." And she did not look at me. She never once looked to me for help, which was its own small mercy and its own great grief, because it meant she had never for one moment imagined the gate could help her, and she turned, and she walked on toward Cordell Street, slower than I had ever heard her walk, and she did not wave. She did not wave. I stood there. I want to be honest about what those next moments were, because they are the hinge of everything, and because a younger man might make them into something braver than they were. I did not move. I did not speak. I did not break my post. Every muscle in me was screaming to step out of my place and go after her and tell her the truth, that she was no nuisance, that she was the finest thing that had ever come to that gate, that a whole guardroom of hard men kept her ledge clean out of love, that I knew who Harlan was and what he had done and what she was doing when she raised her hand, and I did none of it. I held my post. Because the post was not mine to abandon, not even for her, Not even then. Because a man who breaks in the one moment that matters most has been faithful to nothing but his own feelings. And because I understood, standing there with my eyes burning on the far railing, that the way to help her was not to break the order but to go over the head of whoever had given it, up and up, to someone with the standing to unmake it, and that to do that I had first to finish standing my watch like a soldier, and not like a heartbroken man. So I finished my watch. It was the hardest thing I have done in the uniform, and when the guard changed at the top of the hour, I did not go to the guardroom to warm my hands. I went to find Sergeant Halloway, and I stood in front of him, and I said the thing plainly for the first time to another living soul. "Sergeant," I said, "the woman who was moved off the railing this morning is Winifred Ames. She is the widow of Corporal Harlan Ames of the 1st Company, who drowned off the water stair saving a child, and who was given the Cross of the Realm for it by the King's own hand. She has come to this gate every working morning for 3 years to wish the guard well, because her husband stood a gate like it, and she cannot say good morning to him any longer, so she says it to us. She has never asked us for one thing. She left biscuits on the cold days because she thought we were perished. And this morning a man of the house told her she was a nuisance, and she said she was sorry, and she went away, and she did not wave. I stopped. My voice had gone somewhere I could not follow it. I could not speak, Sergeant. I was on post, but I am off post now, and I am asking you, I am begging you to carry that up, whatever it costs me. Somebody in that house needs to know her name." Halloway looked at me for a long time. 30 years of the regiment were in his face, and 30 years of orders obeyed and men buried and small cruelties swallowed for the good of good order. And then he said, very quietly, "I knew Harlan Ames, Croft. I was a boy in the ranks when he went into the river. I carried a corner of the box." He turned his cap in his hands. "You did right to hold your post. You did right to come to me. Now you leave it with me, and you go and get warm, and you say nothing to anyone, because the higher a thing has to climb, the cleaner it has to be, and if this becomes guardroom gossip, it dies in the guardroom." He put on his cap. "There is one person in this house who will want to know the name of Harlan Ames's widow, and it is not the person who sent that young man to the railing." I did not know then who he meant. I know now. And I have thought many times since about the strange machinery of a great house. How an order can come down from one height and be answered from another. How the same institution that sent a smooth young man to move an old woman along could also, from a different room, send what it sent in the end. And I have decided that a palace is not one face but many, and that the whole art of serving it well is to carry the truth to the right face, and that Halloway, who had carried a corner of Harlan Ames's coffin 30 years before, knew exactly which face to carry it to. She did not come the next morning, nor the morning after. The railing at 11 minutes past 7 stayed empty, and the quarter struck on nothing, and I stood the gate through the emptiest week of my service, not knowing whether the truth was climbing or dying, whether Halloway had reached the right face or run into a wall, whether I would ever again in this life hear the double beat of shoe and stick come up from the south. I had spent her, in a way. I had spent the last of her welcome to buy one throw of the dice, and I did not know how the dice had fallen, and there is no posting in the world lonelier than a gate a beloved footstep has stopped visiting. Then on the 9th day of that emptiness, Sergeant Halloway came to me in the guardroom before the dawn watch, and he did not sit, and his face was doing something I had never seen it do, and he said, "Croft, get your best kit ready for Thursday, full dress. The good bearskin, the one without the bald patch. You're to stand the King's Gate on Thursday morning particular, and you're not to be relieved off it by order." He almost smiled and stopped himself, the way a soldier does. "And you're to say nothing to the widow if she comes, and give nothing away, because Thursday is not going to be an ordinary morning, and it is not my place or yours to spoil it." He put a hand on my shoulder, which in 11 years he had never done. "They know her name, lad. The right face knows her name. Now stand your post on Thursday, and let the house do the rest." Thursday came gray and still, with a high thin overcast that let a pale light down onto the forecourt, the kind of light that makes brass look like it holds a candle inside it. I had been up since 3 seeing to my kit. The good bearskin sat square. The tunic was pressed to a knife's edge and the buttons burned. I took the king's gate at the changing of the guard and I stood it, and I did not yet understand the whole of what had been arranged, only that the forecourt behind me had begun, very early, to fill. They came out quietly, the household in the hour after dawn. First the master of the guard and a full guard of honor, 30 men in double file, who formed up in a hollow square on the flagstones behind me with a precision that told me this was no ordinary muster. Then officials, and then, to my astonishment, the regimental colors were brought out, the great embroidered standard of the first company, that comes out only for the highest occasions, and set at the head of the square. And then, as the Cordell clock came round towards 7, the family itself came down onto the forecourt. Princess Adela first, the king's sister in the dark blue she favored, with a face like a woman attending something she had fought for and won. And behind her the crown Prince Rowan, grave and young and watchful. And last, unhurried, King Alaric himself, in the plain undress uniform of the regiment he had led as a young man, with the cross of the realm ribbon at his own breast among the others. I stood my post through all of it with my eyes on the far railing and my heart hammering the buttons, and I understood by now that whatever this was, it was aimed south, at the empty road, at 11 minutes past 7, and I did not dare to hope the thing I was hoping. And then I heard it. The double-beat shoe and stick coming up from the south. She had been fetched, I learned later, a car sent to her small rooms above a haberdasher's on Farrell Lane, and a lady of the household to call on her and tell her only that the palace wished to see her and would be glad if she came as she was. So that Winifred Ames arrived at the king's gate that Thursday morning in her wren-brown coat and her white pinned hair, on foot for the last stretch as she always came, with her blackthorn stick at her own hour, not knowing. She swore to me afterward that she had not known, that she had thought perhaps she was being called to be scolded properly this time, and had come anyway, because she would rather be scolded than stay away. She came up the railing at 11 minutes past 7 and stopped where she always stopped, level with the north pillar, and she saw the forecourt full of soldiers and colors, and the family of the king all turned toward her, and she went very still, and her hand tightened on her stick, and she did not understand. The master of the guard stepped to the railing, but it was not he who spoke first. King Alaric raised one hand a few inches, the smallest gesture, and the master stood down, and the king himself walked forward across the flagstones to the inside of the railing, close enough to the old woman that only the iron stood between them, and he looked at her for a moment with a gentleness I had not known was in the man. And then he spoke, not loudly, but the forecourt was so silent that it carried to every stone. "Mrs. Ames," he said, "Winifred Ames, I hope you'll forgive an old regiment for taking so long to learn your name." She could not answer. I saw her mouth move and nothing come. "You are the widow," the king went on, "of Corporal Harlan Ames of the first company of my guard, who 34 years ago went into the river off the water stair to bring a drowning child to the steps, and gave his own life doing it, and was awarded the cross of the realm which you received from my father's hand." He paused. "I was a boy then. I remember the day. I remember that you stood very straight and made no sound, and I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone braver than the guardsman who went into the water, until I saw his wife standing on the stair." A sound went through the assembled guard, very small, 30 men breathing in at once. "For 3 years," the king said, "you have come to this gate every working morning to wish my guardsmen well. You have asked nothing. You have left small kindnesses on cold days for men who were not permitted to thank you. You have kept, at this gate, a faith that this house did not know it was being kept, and did not deserve, and repaid, some days ago, with a discourtesy for which I have come in person to ask your pardon." He inclined his head to her, the king of the realm, bowing his head to a widow in a faded coat at his own railing, and I have served the crown 11 years, and I have never been prouder of it than in that moment. That will not stand. The order that troubled you is rescinded. This gate is yours, Mrs. Ames, for as long as you care to come to it, at any hour you please, and there is no man in this uniform who will ever again call your coming anything but an honor." Princess Adela came forward then and stood at her brother's shoulder, and it was she who carried the small box, and it was she, I have always loved her for it, who did the thing that made the old woman weep at last. "We could not give your Harlan back to you," the princess said. "We would if we could. But we have had struck in the regiment's honor and in yours, a token, not a medal. You have your medal, a token of the household's own, that names you a companion of this gate, a friend of the first company for the rest of your days. And we have set your name, and his in the roll of the regiment's honored, where it will be read out on the regiment's day for as long as there is a regiment to read it. Your name, Mrs. Ames, Winifred Ames. It is written now where it cannot be unwritten." And the master of the guard, on a nod from the king, drew himself up and called it out, called her name across the full forecourt in the great voice they use for the honored, so that it rang off the palace stone and out over the railing into the waking city. "Winifred Ames, companion of the king's gate, friend of the first company, the household honors her." And 30 men of the guard of honor came to attention with a single crash of boots that I felt through the flagstones and up into my own bones, and the colors dipped to her, the great standard of the first company bowing to a widow at a railing, and Winifred Ames stood there in her wren-brown coat, with the tears running down all the upward-running lines of her face. Hearing her own name called in the voice reserved for heroes, in front of the king, in front of the crown, in front of the whole embroidered weight of the house her husband had died for. But the king was not quite finished, and what he did last he did, I have always believed, because Halloway told him to, or told Adela who told him. Because someone in that house had understood not only the widow's story but the guardsman's, and had carried up the whole of it, the wave and the weight and the invisible salute and the gate that could not answer. King Alaric turned from the railing, and he looked across the forecourt at me, at the single guardsman standing his solitary post at the north pillar, the one man there not part of the guard of honor, the one still statue in all that ceremony, and he said, in a voice pitched for me and for her and for everyone, "Corporal, I am told you have stood this gate for this lady 3 years, and never once been permitted to answer her good morning." He let that sit a moment on the silent stones. "You have my leave. This morning and this morning only, and by command of your king, so that no man can ever say you broke your discipline, you will answer her." For 11 years I had kept a carved face. For 3 of those years I had kept it against the hardest thing a still man can be given, which is a gentle old voice wishing him well and a small hand turning in the air. I had held through insult and mockery, and a mug of cider across my boots. I had held through the biscuits and the cough and the empty railing. I had held on the morning she was moved along, when everything in me wanted to break, and holding it had felt like being torn slowly down the middle. And now my king had commanded me to break cleanly in the open, with the whole house watching, had made the breaking itself an act of discipline, an order to be obeyed, and so I turned my head at last after 3 years, and I looked at Winifred Ames full in the face. She was looking at me, of course she was. She had been looking at me, or at the gate, or at Harlan through me every morning for 3 years, and now at last there was a man behind the statue's face looking back, and I watched her understand it, watched her understand that the gate had known her, had heard her every good morning, had grieved the empty days, had gathered itself up straight for her every single time she raised her hand and she had never known, and her own hand rose slowly at the height of her shoulder and turned in the air. The wave. The same small private wave she had given a dead man 40 years ago and given me for 3 years, and I had never once been allowed to answer. I answered it. I brought my white-gloved hand up to the brim of the bearskin in the fullest, slowest, most deliberate salute I have ever given any soul on this earth. Not a wave. I am not a waving man, but the deepest honor a soldier's hand can pay, and I held it, and I looked at her over it, and I let her see, for the first and only time, the whole of the man who had been standing at her gate. The warmth, the grief, the 3 years of silent devotion, all of it, unlocked at last by a king's command and laid at the feet of a widow in a wren-brown coat. And I said the words. After 3 years I said them, in a voice that shook and that I did not try to steady, because some things should not be said steadily. Good morning to you, Mrs. Ames, and thank you. Thank you for every one of them. She put her glove to her mouth and she wept and she laughed through it and she said, Oh, you could hear me, all that time. You could hear me. And I said, every morning, Mrs. Every single one, and the whole forecourt of hard soldiers stood at attention and pretended, in the way soldiers do, that there was something in the air troubling all of their eyes at once. That is the moment the palace meant when it said, afterward, that it had called her name. And it is a true telling and a good one, and I have no quarrel with it. But I have wanted for a long time to set down the rest, the 3 years underneath the one morning, the biscuits and the cough and the empty railing and the man in the good coat, the 1,000 held breaths at 11 minutes past 7. Because a great house calling a name in one grand morning is a fine thing, but it is not the whole thing, and the whole thing is better. The whole thing is a woman who kept faith with love across 40 years, and a drowned husband and a lonely old age, at a gate that could not answer her, and never asked it to, and did it for its own sake because it was the last good thing she could do. And the house, when at long last it learned of her, did not merely tolerate her. It came down onto the flagstones in its full glory and bowed its colors to her and read her name in the voice of heroes. That is what the crown is for on its best days. That is what I signed my life to stand in front of. It does not always live up to itself. That morning it did. Afterward there was tea in a room I had never been in, with the princess and the old woman side by side on a settee like two friends, and the king looking on, and Halloway standing by the wall with his cap under his arm and 30 years of the regiment quiet and content in his face at last. I was sent for. I stood in the doorway in my dress kit not knowing what to do with my hands, and Winifred Ames looked up at me and said, So you have a name after all. All this time and I never asked it. Wasn't that wrong of me? And I said, Croft, Mrs. Whiston Croft. And she said the whole of it back to me slowly, the way you learn a thing you mean to keep, Whiston Croft. And I have been called by many people in my life, sergeants and officers and the men of my company, but I do not think my own name has ever sounded to me the way it sounded in her mouth that morning, like something set carefully on a shelf where it would not be lost again. She kept coming to the gate. That is the part I love best to tell, because grand mornings end and ordinary mornings are the true measure of a thing. The order was rescinded, as the king had said, and Winifred Ames came to the king's gate at 11 minutes past 7 for as many mornings as her strength allowed, and she wished the guard good morning, and she waved, and now, by the special standing leave the king had granted her alone, entered in the post orders in the master's own hand, so that no young official would ever trouble her again. The guardsman on duty was permitted, if he chose, to incline his head to her the barest degree in answer. Not a wave. We are still the gate, but a small grave nod once to Mrs. Ames of the North Pillar, companion of the gate, and every man who stood that post counted it an honor to be the one to give it. The biscuits came back too, on the cold mornings, wrapped in their twist of wax paper, and no one ever again called them a nuisance. And I will tell you that the ledge of the North Pillar was kept cleaner and squarer in those years than any stone in the whole palace, because a dozen hard men made it their private business to keep it fit for what it held. The under-equerry in the good coat, I heard, was moved to other duties. I bore him no grudge in the end. He had carried an order he did not understand. The fault was never his but the order's, and the order's fault was that it did not know a name. That is the whole moral of it, if a story like this has one. Cruelty, most of the time, is not made of malice. It is made of not knowing, of a rule that has forgotten the person it is standing on. And the cure for it is not to break the rules but to make the house know the name, to carry the truth up to the right face, to trust that behind all the cold machinery of a great institution there is, somewhere, a room with a heart in it, and a person who will come down onto the flagstones and bow the colors when they finally understand. Winifred Ames lived 4 more years, and came to the gate in all but the worst weather of them, and when at the last she grew too frail to walk the length of Farrow Lane, the household, quietly, without being asked, the way the best kindnesses are done, saw to it that a car brought her on the morning she wished to come, and a chair was set for her inside the railing, on the palace side, where no member of the public sits, so that she could keep her faith in comfort and out of the wind. She died in her sleep in the spring of the 4th year, and they gave her a soldier's send-off she had not earned by any rule, and had earned entirely by every measure that matters, with a corner of her small coffin carried, at his own insistence, by a corporal of the King's Guard named Whiston Croft, who had at last been given leave to answer her, and meant to keep answering her as long as he had breath and a hand to raise. They set a small brass plate into the base of the north pillar, level with the old ledge, where the morning light strikes it first. It gives no long inscription. Great houses, when they finally understand a thing, learn to say it plainly. It carries 2 names and 4 words, and I have stood over it 10,000 mornings since, and I will tell you what it says, and then I will have told you the whole of it. It says Harlan and Winifred Ames. They kept the faith. I stand the King's Gate still. I am older now than Halloway was when he put his hand on my shoulder, and I have a stiff knee and a memory the young men come to me to borrow, and I have trained a good many guardsmen to keep the carved face and hold the post and understand that the stillness is not for them but for the thing they stand for. I teach them the insults and how to let those slide down the wall. And then I teach them the harder thing, the thing no one taught me and I had to learn from a widow in a wren-brown coat, that the day will come, if they stand a gate long enough, when it is not contempt that tests them but kindness, when some ordinary faithful soul folds them into a mourning and wishes them well and asks nothing back. And that when it does, they are to hold their post and gather themselves up straight, and give what they cannot give with their hands, and they are to learn that person's name and carry it, and mind it, because you never know what a small daily kindness is carrying, or how far back it reaches, or whose whole life is turning quietly in the air of a wave you are forbidden to answer. And every working morning at 11 minutes past 7, when the Cordell clock comes round toward the quarter, I let my eyes drop for less than a heartbeat to the brass plate at the foot of the north pillar, where the first light of the day is always waiting on it, and I gather myself up inside the uniform straighter than I stand for any living soul, and I give the invisible salute, the presenting of the whole of me, to Harlan and Winifred Ames, who kept the faith and taught a statue how. Good morning to you, Mrs. Ames. Every single one.